As always, can you see me? Can you hear me? Um, so welcome to Coffee Time Live. Since it's later for me, I already had my coffee, so we'll call it Water Bottle Sunday, maybe. It's a big topic today. Can somebody put in the comments? And as a matter of fact, I want to mention, depending on your screen and where you're watching this, you may or may not see the live comments. Oh, I got a neighbor dog. The comments will show up on the right side of the video that you're watching. If you're watching it on TV, the only way you're going to see the comments if you pull out your phone and laptop and run the same thing, but the comments will show. I keep getting asked about that. I can't ever see the comments. You're going to have to play with it. You're on laptop and on your phone, you've got a couple different formats you can use. There's the one where it's small and there's a space over on the right side. That's the one you want to use. Then you've got, I think it's called theater, where it takes up the width, but you still have a computer screen top and bottom. And then you've got full screen where it takes up the entire screen. You can see it on laptop on the entire screen or on theater mode if you go to the live chat and have it'll do a pop-out window. And so you could put that somewhere on the screen. But you're gonna have to, I can't really show you here, so you're gonna have to work through it and figure it out, but believe me, the live chat is there. And I've got a number of good mornings, so I'm guessing that this is working. Okay, big topic today. I spent, oh my God, hours and hours and hours over the last few days trying to figure out what I was going to do on this and why am I doing this. And it's also one of my least favorite topics, but what are the top two? Cost of living and is it safe? And so today we're going to talk about is it safe and crime on buses and how to be careful, situations in general. There's no bonjour here. It's an important topic, but I think it's actually really misunderstood. The more you think about it, the more I think you can be at ease. And so I'll explain why that also. And because it's kind of a complicated topic, I got pages of notes here. So you're going to have to kind of excuse me as I wade through them and try to keep myself on track and keep things in order. Now, one thing you won't have to do, and it's actually what I originally intended to do, is sit and wade through a bunch of statistics. I'm not going to be comparing statistics in the United States to Colombia or to Ecuador. I'm not going to do that because the more I look through the statistics, the more I realized it's pointless. It's actually kind of meaningless. It will have little to do with what your experience may or may not be. So I don't want to waste your time. Mostly I didn't want to waste my time. So I'm just going to talk about the idea of crime in general. Live from Santa Marta. Howdy. Okay. Crime really is about your comfort level. And you say, no, it's about being pickpocketed or jacked. No, it's actually, think about it. It's about your comfort level. We're going to assume, because most people are from the United States or Canada, I'm going to use that as a point of reference. In the United States, you had a comfort level. Also in the United States, while most people that are my audience, not all, but most, are in the process of retiring or have retired or in a situation, even if they're in their 50s, that's similar to retirement. That's most of the audience. So that's who I'm going to speak to in this video primarily. When you're in the United States, you're working a job. You're knocking down $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a week. somebody reaches in your car and steals your phone or steals your camera, you just go out and buy another one. It's really not a problem. Once you come here, or you go to Ecuador, Colombia, wherever you go, you're no longer working that full-time job. And so part of that adjustment is that you are now on a fixed income that's considerably less. And so if somebody steals your phone, it becomes much more dramatic. When I was working in the United States, if I lost one of my cameras, it's no big deal. I can go out and buy another one. I go buy one every week. I mean, you don't want to, and you get aggravated. Nobody wants to be, ripped off. But the situation was very different. Here, I lose a camera, and my plan is like almost a year to replace it. So you have this comfort level when you come to Ecuador, you come to Colombia, and I'm speaking to both today. And I will speak throughout this about some things of Ecuador and Colombia. You're coming to a strange place. Even if you've been here before, you are now living here, you're residing here. You're alone. In the US, something happens, you call your friend, you're not going to believe what just happened to me. You need anything? I got this, I can help you with that. You have a safety net. Even hermits like me, I had people that I could reach out to. When you go to a place, it takes time. You go to a place like here I am in Armenia, or when I lived in Cuenca, something happens, you don't have the same safety net. So there's, and you know that whether consciously or not, it's like, well, if something happens, what do I do? Where you're from, you live there your whole life, something happens, you know what to do. So you've got that unknown. Second of all, you're contending with the language. Now, there's a few people here. Whoa, that jumped out there. Thank you very much for the donation. I definitely appreciate it. There is a $sign, and my fundraising is becoming primarily these Sunday coffee times. So feel free if you think it's worth it. Okay, enough of the spiel. But thank you, Charles. A number of my viewers are fluent in Spanish, and so they've got an edge, but the majority of people do not. And so something happens, not only you don't know what to do, who to turn to, but let's say the police come along, you go to the police. I mean, how do you explain without having it really misunderstood what's going on? And what if it's a situation where maybe you're going to look like you did something wrong, and I don't want to put myself in a bad situation. Consequently, a lot of things don't even get reported. So you have that makes it more stressful. And these are reasons why it's such a big topic, where if you're in the United States or in Canada and you're thinking about moving to another city, it's a topic, but it's nowhere near as big. And third, of course, you have culture. What's the culture like? In Ecuador, it's very different than in Colombia. It's very different than in the United States. In Ecuador, there's a long history of handling things yourself. Towns, basically vigilante justice is still alive in Ecuador. Maybe not so much in big cities, but barrios, it still happens. I mean, recently there was, unfortunately, it was a Venezuelan with an Ecuadorian girlfriend, and something happened. I think there was a rape and a murder, and she didn't want him anymore. So the community rose up. It's like pitchforks and torches. In Colombia, you have some of that, but it's kind of in between the US and here. In the US, people just sit back and mostly wait for the cops, unless you really live out in the country. And then you're going to go take care of it yourself. But, it's more of a wait for the police. So you have a difference in culture. And the bottom line is, when you come to a place like this and you're out of your element, the reason you're having this anxiety about crime is you feel helpless. You feel helpless about what to do and how to overcome what may happen. Oh my God, it becomes more traumatic if you're outside of your comfort zone. And so, that's why it's the number one question people are going to ask, and why it's a big concern. But keep in mind that when you travel, a big part of travel is overcoming this comfort situation. And once you identify what it is, why it is you're feeling that way, you can take steps to do something about it. Does it mean that you go to Colombia and there's no crime? No. Does it mean that there's endless crime? No. There's a big misunderstanding about Colombia that goes back more than 20 years ago, when there was a problem, when you basically had a civil war being fought out by a number of factions, plus the drug cartels involved. Well, those things barely exist anymore, and where they do exist isn't really where the populations are. So what you have in the population centers is really the same kind of crime and issues you would have in any city in the United States, in Toronto, in Detroit, in Chicago, in Baltimore, in Los Angeles. So thank you very much. So it's important to put these things in perspective and not overwrought yourself with fear, but take that energy and put it into what can I do to make sure that I'm as safe as possible. So at this point, I'm going to throw out some tips, and it's going to be common sense. But as common sense as it is, it's amazing how few people actually follow this common sense. I used to walk around a lot in Cuenca. I would go downtown a lot, and I'd see there, you can see so many gringos, and they just stand out like a sore thumb there. They're 8 feet taller than the local people, and they're dressing different. They're all wearing safari hats and safari shorts, and they all have backpacks on that are, designer brand names. I mean, they just stick out like a sore thumb. And you would see a certain amount of ostentatiousness that in the United States, it's just normal, it's just part of living. But you're just waving a big sign saying, hey, I'm a gringo and I'm a tourist here and I'm new here. And it's just, I mean, if you're a criminal, are you going to go for somebody who is secure in where they are, or somebody that looks like they're out of place? So you have to use common sense. Sorry about that. Hold on a second. I got a note there. I don't have a clue what I was trying to say. Remember, if you've got questions, and I know you will have questions, try to put those towards the end of this video. When we get up to getting close to a half an hour into this video, start posting up your questions, because as soon as this video is over, we'll have a Q&A period that'll go probably about 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes is the way it seems to have been running. Okay, so ostentatious, never show off. That means your clothes. Dress down, dress comfortable, dress casual, dress down. Don't wear watches. If you do wear a watch, get a cheap $2 plastic watch. Your cell phone. Now, you're not going to take, most of us get good cell phones, but we don't want to get a crappy cell phone because we enjoy all those features. So I'm not saying pawn off your iPhone or your Samsung S10 or whatever. I'm not saying that. But when you're using your cell phone, use it. Basically, here's what I do. I use my cell phone. It's not a cheap cell phone. It's a Samsung S7 here. It's highline for here. Even though it's older, doesn't matter. But what I do is that I keep it in my front right pocket. And when I need that phone, because they're thin, when I need that phone, I slip it out, I do what I need to do, and I put it right back. I don't keep it out. I don't wave it around. I don't stand there doing video calls. I'll do that somewhere where it's a little more secure. When I'm on the street, the cell phone's in my pocket. Now, if I'm getting a vibration, bzz, 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 something's going on, because I'm dealing with you guys, I'll take a minute, I'll step over off the sidewalk, maybe next to a business. I wait till I see an area that's relatively safe. I'll pull the cell phone out, I'll see what's going on, and I'll put it back down. Or if I'm sitting and eating lunch, I'll do that and then put it away. You don't want to just sit there and keep it flashy and walk down the street using it. You just don't tempt fate. And I would say this also if you're in Chicago or Baltimore or Toronto, it's common sense. Bags. I mentioned the backpack. Try to have something simplistic. Now, we'd like to have good things. Most of us, I'm one of them. You want to have something really nice because you don't want to keep buying it. You want it to last a long time. You want it to have nice features. But again, it can stand out. So if you have a backpack you're using for travel, certain situations, by all means, but feel free to pick up some cheap canvas over the shoulder thing. Or in my case, I don't use one at all unless I'm traveling to another town. Thank you very much, Freebird. Unless I'm traveling to another town, I don't even carry one. But some people feel that they need to do that. They want to make sure they've got a water bottle. They sell water 15 times down one block. I can't imagine anything you really need to have. I carry an umbrella, and I keep a couple things in my pockets, and that's it. But if you feel you need to have one, get something cheap, something that you see local people doing, so it doesn't stand out. You certainly don't need to take your very expensive laptop down to some place that has Wi-Fi so you can flip it open and do some work there. Do that back in this laptop goes with me if I travel for an overnight or two, sometimes, not always. It never leaves my apartment here. There's no reason for it. Well, it doesn't leave my apartment building. There's a patio I will go down on the first floor, and it's beautiful out. And as you know, it's always breezy. So I could sit there and, use my laptop, but it's inside the building or in the area of the building, and I've got security. And so you want to be careful with it. You also don't need to carry big wads of cash. You don't need to pull it out and flash it and have somebody think you're important. It's ostentatious. Actually, they're not really going to think well of you. They're probably going to think you're really stupid. They may not say that, but it's just not the thing to do. And I know some people do that. In the United States, it's kind of a thing to show off a little bit. Look at my car, look at this. I've got all this money. It is not a thing to do here. It's the opposite of the thing to do. You should really figure out what you need for the day, maybe double it or so. What some people will do is put a little extra maybe down in their sock in case something happens. Some people have these, they're like a money belt you can wear under your pants, and it's got a zipper. They're very thin, and you can put money in there, and nobody ever really is going to find that. You can sew an inside pocket inside your pants and put some money in there. There's a lot of things you can do to carry a little more if you need to. And I'm not saying you should be overly paranoid. I'm not. And I don't worry about it on the day when I've got to go pay rent and I've got to pay my bills, all that. I'll be carrying around a couple million pesos as I'm going through this, and I never stress it. But I wouldn't do that normally. I do it because I have to do it, and I do it. I take care of business right away, and then I go on from it. So it's common sense. Never act like money is no problem, whether it's at a hotel, whether you're in a bar, restaurant, maybe you met a couple people and you're having lunch with them. Oh, no, let me take care of that. Oh, it's no problem. You never want to act like it's no problem. You don't need to be, and you don't want to be the big man. You can take care. Here's the way it goes basically in Colombia. If you invite somebody to lunch, it's your obligation to pay for it. Kind of a rule of thumb. It's not in every case, but that's essentially it. So you want to be careful about it. If they invite you, it's really their obligation. When I'm invited, I always offer to pay for my own. And most times they say, no, I got it, I invited you. sometimes they take me up on it, you know, so be prepared. But the lunches aren't that expensive anyway. But just don't be big man on campus. Don't be looking like you've got all this money, because even if the people you are with are reliable, maybe a story gets told to a friend who's not so reliable with innocent intentions. Or maybe there's somebody at a few tables over or down the street or something that noticed this. Don't be that guy. I know this happens a lot in Medellin. Guys will go in there primarily for drugs and women, and not always. And to those that don't, you know, it's like, well, I'm not going to apologize, because you know it's true that a lot of guys go there. They think it's a paradise for drug and women, and consequently, you have people that will view you as a mark because so many come there like that, and they're all flashing money. I can't tell you how many times on the Medellin expat Facebook page, and you viewers right now that are on that, you know what I'm talking about. Oh, I just saw one the other day. I got $15,000 to blow, and I'm coming into Medellin next week. Who wants to go party with me? Are you freaking kidding me? Are you serious? Are you really that stupid? And you see it all the time. You know, it's that big man on campus thing. You're just setting yourself up. And then what you see on that same Facebook page is, you're not going to believe what happened last night. You know, this was stolen, that was stolen. They used the scopolamine, and, you know, I woke up the next morning and everything was gone. Well, duh. I mean, you might as well wear a sign, rob me, take advantage of me, because you put that sign on. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So use some common sense. And I don't care where you go in this world, be it Chicago or Detroit or Toronto or Los Angeles or New Orleans, you name it. You act like that, and that's what you're going to attract. That's who's going to, you know, normal people are going to look and go, oh my God, there's people like that. That's what normal people do. But criminals start salivating. So don't set yourself up for it. Here's things that I do to stay safe. And I should mention, I'm really not a rookie at this. In the United States, I've traveled to almost all the states. I've never been to Idaho, but I've been everywhere else. I've lived in Memphis and Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, and Los Angeles. And I'm like a lot of people, you know, I moved around a lot. I've been to Alaska, been to Hawaii. I've been all over the United States. Spent a lot of time in Canada growing up around the Thousand Islands. We used to go there all the time, had relatives. Mexico, I can't tell you how many times I've been to Mexico. Many times, especially when I lived in Los Angeles, we'd go there a lot. And then I traveled around a lot. I've been all over Asia. I've been to Vietnam and Thailand and Korea and Japan and Philippines and Australia, and I won't even remember them all. In Europe, I've been to England and Denmark and Germany and France and Holland, and I don't remember, you know, I have to actually sit down and think about it. I know that it's 20 countries outside of the United States that I have traveled in, and some of them, 3 of them I've lived in. So I lived in Japan over 3 years. I lived in Ecuador over 3 years, and in total now in Colombia, it adds up to about a year and 8 months. And much of that travel I did alone. And much of that travel I would happen into places that were considered dangerous places. In some cases, like when I was in Peru a few years back, I intentionally went out at night in a very dangerous city because curiosity just got the better of me and I had to see. Really stupid, but I didn't go out with anything that I would miss. But it was really a stupid thing to do, but it kind of goes back to the days when I was young and strong and fearless. Now I'm just old and fat and hopeless, but you know, I still carry some of that mentality sometimes. But you want to avoid certain things, and this is what I do for the most part these days. I don't go out at night. I'm back in my apartment by 7 o'clock, with a few exceptions. And if you do go out at night, try to go with at least another friend. And don't do the after midnight, I got drunk, and it's just stupid to do that. And these days in the United States, it's really kind of silly to do that. Nothing good happens after midnight. Who said that? Somebody said that. It's a quote, but it's real. Nothing good happens after midnight. And so if that's the way it is in Rochester, New York, or in San Diego, California, it's going to be pretty much like that here. So again, use common sense. Tourist areas that are touristy, where a lot of pickpockets are going to hang out. If there's festivals, you have to take extra caution. Don't carry your wallet. Put things in a safe and secure area so you don't get pickpocketed, because the chances are high. And if you go in a touristy area, again, try to go with somebody. Make a few friends and go do these things with people. Try to avoid the solo thing. Now, again, I do solo a lot for a lot of things, but it certainly isn't anything I advise. And I guess we're at water bottle time, so. Favorite thing. Don't carry all your documents in cash. So many people, first of all, don't ever carry your passport. You don't need to carry your passport. I mentioned this recently. Do a photocopy, shrink it down, get it laminated, the signature side and the information side. Carry that in your wallet. If anything ever happens, you can always go get your passport. But there's few things you actually need it for. You don't want to lose that. You don't need to carry a lot of money. Like I said, you don't even need to carry a wallet. So you can carry your cedula or your copy of the passport and some money, and stick it on an inside pocket, and you're good to go. So using some caution is going to go a long way. Again, anywhere in the world, you see Colombia as more dangerous because of the stigma. You see Ecuador as potentially really dangerous because it's outside of the boundaries of North and South, or North America, as in Canada and the United States. But those things have little to do with actual crime. Those are just feelings that you have. Now, crime in the USA versus Colombia, for example. And I'm going to talk a lot about Ecuador here too. I mentioned about the statistics. Do not go in and look up statistics and say, the statistics say Ecuador is safer than Colombia, therefore it's a better place to go as far as crime goes. And I see people on Facebook all the time arguing like they've got a vested interest in this, defending how safe Ecuador is versus how dangerous it is in Colombia. And they're really talking through their butt. Those statistics have very little meaning to reality. And it's one of the reasons I didn't want to do statistics today, even though that's the way this started out. First of all, you're going to see so much conflicting information. You soon realize that, and this will be various government world information, you soon realize that nobody really knows. There's a lot of speculation that goes on. And in Ecuador in particular, and it's cultural for the most part, is the majority of crimes don't even go reported. They're unreported crimes. And again, I've talked about this recently, and I gave some anecdotal comments, but you talk to anybody who's from Ecuador, any length, and they're going to share a lot of information, particularly about all the crimes that they're aware of that nobody ever reports, because that's just the way it is. So how good are the stats if you've got, more than half of the crimes not even getting reported? They talk about, well, guns are not an issue in Ecuador. Well, guns are certainly an issue, and many crimes that do get reported have guns involved, and that's one of the reasons they get reported. Somebody got murdered, and so you kind of have to report it to the police, or they're going to find out. But again, here you've got a country of Ecuador that when it was going through its socialism phase, they outlawed guns. It's kind of like Venezuela, like Cuba. Guns are outlawed, but you still have a fair amount of gun crime. Now, you may not have gun robberies reported. It's mostly reported if somebody gets shot. So they have crime, they have gun crime, they have murders, they have drug deals, they've got drug cartels operating there, they've got bombs that go off. In Guayaquil, there was a rash of judges that were getting bombed just a couple of years ago. Does that mean that it's abnormally unsafe? No, Ecuador is relatively safe, but then almost everywhere I've ever been throughout this world is relatively safe. Crime doesn't exist unless you actually have an incident. And just by the very nature of it, by the fact that 90% of the people in this world are good people, the chances of you running into crime are really pretty low, no matter where you are, unless you make yourself a target. So a lot of it is in your hands. A lot of it's in your control. Now, in Colombia, as I mentioned, much of what goes on here as far as the reputation goes back to when there were, you had the ELN and the FARC, and you had various right and left wing groups. They were all fighting for control of certain things, and much of it was related to the drug trade that was very heavy in Colombia. Well, now all that drug trade, well, there's still some that exist, and there's a couple pocket areas on the border of Venezuela and on the border of Ecuador. But those drug cartels of Colombia, they lost their teeth for the most part. And now it's the cartels out of Mexico that really control these. And if you go on the border of Ecuador, for example, and into Ecuador, into Colombia, what you find, and you can see this on news reports when they capture people, you find Bolivians, you find Peruvians, you find Ecuadorians, you find Colombians, you find Mexicans. So you have these basically criminals that just get together to commit crime. It's not an issue of it's Colombia or it's Ecuador. It's just a matter of criminals. So the statistics aren't really going to help you. Well, something I want to say about that, but I'm going to say it a little bit further down. You want to basically consider also when you're doing comparison the USA versus Ecuador and Colombia, much of it has to do with relativity in size. For example, in the United States, you've got a population of 350 million people. Plus, I'm sorry, back up, 328, 330 million people. But you also have, according to the latest university study I saw just a few weeks ago, they're actually estimating about 20 million undocumented people in the United States. The 11 million figure that everybody throws around in politics, that actually goes back almost 30 years. And 30 years later, it's obviously still not 11 million. So they think it's a minimum of 20 million, could be up to 50 million people illegally. So you're looking at a population in the United States of about 350 million people. Now, what do you have in Ecuador? You got about 17 million people. There's cities with a greater population than that. And in Colombia, you've got about 50 million people. So you've got relatively small population. So that comes into play when you're dealing with statistics. And you say, well, percentages will do that, but it doesn't paint the full picture. It's almost impossible to compare one to the other. But one thing I can say that holds true in my experience and holds true in any information I see anywhere, bigger the city, the more the crime. Yes, you have country crime, but it's rare. In Ecuador, you hear every so often that there's a gringo that lived out by himself or with his wife, retired out in the middle of nowhere, and 4 guys come along with guns, home invasion, shot them and left. You hear that story probably a couple times a year. Now, is that significant statistically? Well, if you're those people, yes, but it's barely a blip on the radar. In the United States, as of 2019, they say there's about 80,000 people, or 80%. This is why I didn't want to do any statistics. 80% of the population of the United States lives in urban areas, city or the immediate surrounding area. 20% lives in all the rest of the country, because the urban areas amount to what, like 4% of the land size. And so you've got all the rest of this area where you just have 20% of the people. In Ecuador, here I got numbers that went everywhere from 57% to 80%. Most of the information's kind of settled around 57%. So, just for sake of argument, we'll say 57 or 60% of the people in Ecuador live in cities, the rest live rurally. And most of those are in the Andes or on the coast. In Colombia, with 50 million people, about 75% of the people in Colombia live in urban centers. So it makes sense, because the more developed the country is, the more it seems to gravitate towards urban areas. And I think it has a lot to do with economy. So Ecuador, being the least developed of what we're talking about, has the fewer people in the cities. But it's the population centers of the cities that is the thing about crime. And why is that an element of increased crime? Well, in the cities, it's easy for them to spot an easy target simply by sheer volume of people. So they can sit back and, like people watch, they can pick and choose who's going to be a target, which goes to, don't be so obvious, because a criminal is there checking these people out. They're looking for the weak animal of the herd, so they can kind of trim them off and take advantage of it. And I'm sorry about all these notes that I'm missing here. I will read through all of them, but got to keep talking. And I can't do both. It's too small. I have to get up close. So there's crime in the cities because it's easy to find a target. Second of all, it's easy for them to become invisible. It's easy to escape. There's just so many people that can blend into the crowd. It's, when you go up and rob somebody who's not prepared or mentally aware or used to it, they're a little discombobulated. They just they're not centered. They're not focused. So they're not really going to remember a lot of detail about what happened. It all happened in a blur. So it's easy for them to escape, to blend in. And then, of course, you've got the profit potential, where you can pick out the best targets that are wearing the nice watches and the backpacks and all of that. And they don't have to sit there and wait for days. They can wait for minutes. So, go hang out at Laureles or Poblado in Medellin and, pick your targets. And there you go. And sometimes they will stalk that person because they know they're going to go out drinking that night, and they'll hook them up with this hot girl. It will all be a setup. And it could be from shortly after you arrive there. So don't fall into these traps. But that's why cities are more dangerous. And cities are everywhere. Chicago, Baltimore. I mean, everybody's talking about the shootings, which brought this crime topic up to begin with, because I kept seeing these things about how the United States is more dangerous than it is in Ecuador, more dangerous than it is in Colombia. Actually not true, but these things become political just for the sake of argument, I guess. But when you had those shootings, you actually had more shootings happen in Chicago that weekend that nobody ever seemed to hear about. Cities is the key to this. In the bigger city, the more apt there's going to be of crime. That's just the way it is. So if you want to go live in Quito, you've got a greater chance of crime than if you want to live in Loja, for example. Or if you want to live in Medellin, you've got greater chance of crime than if you want to live in Manizales. Right from the start, that's going to be a big issue. Another thing to consider is police. The effect of police has a huge impact on what level of crime you have. Now, I'll give you an example of New York City. Most of us know this story. But in the 70s, New York City was a very dangerous place. As a matter of fact, in the 70s, one time I went with a friend. That weekend was just a nightmare. So many things happened. I witnessed so much crime. I watched a cop get blown away by a shotgun right in front of me. There's so many things that happened on that weekend. I swear I'd never go back to New York City. It was a cesspool. Then you had this guy Giuliani come in. Whether you love him or hate him, doesn't matter. Forget the politics of it. He put in place this thing called broken windows. And basically, he empowered the police to go after petty crime. And they did. And crime in general fell. If a criminal thinks it's going to be high risk, he's going to move along to where it's low risk. What happened was a lot of criminals just left New York City. It was not the place to do crime, even small crime. And to this day, even though it's sliding backwards, and we could talk about that some other time, not important, but even to this day, New York City is one of the safe. For a long time, it was the safest big city in the world. It's still, if it's not the safest, it's up there. But it had to do with police presence. And again, recently in the news, may or may not be backsliding, but the effects become obvious. In Cuenca, why is Cuenca relatively safer than a place like Guayaquil or Quito? Well, for one, it's smaller. And so if it's smaller, it's going to be safer. That's almost always true. But they put a lot of money into extra police in Cuenca. They put a lot of money into extra police in Cuenca. That doesn't happen in Quito or Guayaquil or other places. Why? Because it's such a tourist place. Cuenca was designated as this big tourist location many years ago, and they've worked very hard to create this tourist go-to place. The whole reason they have the tranvia, they wanted that as a showpiece. It wasn't practical. It wasn't the best way to go. I mean, hybrid buses would have been, but they did that for this image. So they invested a ton of money. My concern, if you're living in Cuenca, the thing to think about is as they keep cutting budgets to pay for all the money that was stolen during the last regime, at some point that's going to affect the level of the police. And when it affects the level of police, you're going to have a rise in crime. And I think we're already seeing that a little bit there, but maybe not. It's not a slam on Cuenca. Again, these things, it's not about the country. It's a function. Crime is a function of these factors. And in Colombia, as they got a handle on how bad things used to be, they put more police out. Now when you ride the bus, you've got a cop that'll come on, or military. They'll come on, they'll check IDs, they'll go off, particularly if you're coming from the borders. You may not see it, in country from one town to the next, but you may. There's police stops, police checks all over the place. They come in, they check. Didn't used to be like that. But then again, buses used to be targets. There was kidnappings, all kinds of things went on. Well, since they've done this, they put these military and police outposts all over the place. Crime drastically reduced. So crime is reasonable. You're going to argue, you're going to wave the stats. Oh, it's the most dangerous. Well, depending on what stats you look at and how you look at it. But if you live here, you realize not necessarily the case. Crime is a function of all these things I'm talking about. And these are things that you really should take into account consideration if you're going to move somewhere. Okay, buses. Crime on buses. You got city buses, just run around. Like here in Armenia, we've got a couple lines. You know, you see the red ones in my videos all the time. In every city, you've got buses that don't go outside the city, just from stop to stop to stop. Then you got local buses, like we have a bus that runs to Circassia or Calarca or someplace locally. And then you got regional buses, like I can get on a bus and go to Bogota, or I can go to Medellin or wherever. And you have the same thing in Ecuador. You've got city and local and regional buses. The city buses, there's a problem of pickpocketing. Now, here in Armenia, it doesn't really seem to be much of a problem, although it will happen once in a while. Cell phones, usually the target. Cuenca, it was a lot more, it's relatively common there, but if you're cautious with your cell phone and keeping it in a place where it's going to be difficult for them to lift it, then maybe it's not going to happen so much. Regional crime here is nothing like it used to be because, as I mentioned, all the police that are coming and going, the buses, the road checks. In Ecuador, it really amounts to a few lines that tend to be dangerous. They were targets. They were notorious targets. Now, I haven't heard recently, so for the past year, I can't really speak to this, but one of the most dangerous lines was going from Cuenca to Guayaquil at night. Now, you could make that run during a day and you were okay, but at night, it was kind of crazy. They were getting held up at least once a month. 1 month, there were 3 murders, 3 different times. They get in and shoot the bus driver for effect and rob everybody, go back through and rob everybody. I haven't heard that in a while, but that used to be a regular occurrence. And of course, bus safety in general isn't just crime. It's the driver. And this is something in Ecuador you have to be careful with, and there's a reason for it. In Ecuador, you get an occasional good driver. In Colombia, you get an occasional bad driver. Drivers are way better in Colombia than they are in Ecuador. Now, is it because the drivers are better skilled? Are the roads different? Well, neither one necessarily has much to do with it. It has a lot to do with the pay system. In Ecuador, and this isn't all lines, but it's most of the bus lines, the drivers are paid based on how many people they pick up and how fast they get to their destination. Well, you combine that with, the kind of roads that they have, these windy roads and cliffs to follow, to run off of, and you've created a recipe for disaster. And so consequently, you hear about buses going off the cliff all the time. In a country with such a small population, there should not be so many bus crashes every month, but it exists. And that's why. It's this pay system. On the bus lines that just pay their driver regardless, like a Greyhound bus driver, those have very good safety records. So my advice in Ecuador is to find the bus lines, like Flota Imbabura is one of them, but find the bus lines that pay the driver without forcing him to break all the speed laws, and you'll be a lot safer. In Colombia, I rarely run into what I would call a bad driver. They pretty much, I feel much better riding buses here in Colombia, but maybe that's partly coming from Ecuador and how insane it was there. And on a bus, I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. Do everything you can not to ride in the back of a bus, especially if it's a bus with poor maintenance. I've hurt my back several times where I would have to lay on the floor for 3 or 4 days. I could barely move. It would seize up. I don't have a lot of back problems. I really don't have back problems, but I know what it's like from those things happening. Sometimes you can't really help it, but I would rather wait a few hours for the next bus and get a seat more towards the front than to take the back unless I absolutely have to. You're leveraged so much more. And one of the issues in South America is you get speed bumps all the time in the most obscure places like, why on earth did they put a speed bump there? And the buses will usually slow down for it, but sometimes, I don't know, they forget it, they get distracted, it jumped up at them, it can hit that. And if you've got a bus and you'll repair, the shocks in the back are weak, that can slam you down and you hear crunch up that's what happened to me. I've had people around me hear my back crunch because it just caught me off guard. It can be dangerous. So be careful of that. So why even take a bus then? In Ecuador, you don't have a lot of choice. If you want to go from city to city to city, in many cases, it's your only good option. You take a bus because it's cheap. Buses are dirt cheap. They're not even pennies for the mile. It's so cheap to ride a bus. Another thing is frequency. If you're going somewhere, there's a good chance you catch a bus every 15 minutes, half hour, maybe an hour. And the third thing is it's really nice to catch a lot of beautiful scenery, interesting things. If you're traveling, it's kind of part of it, right? So, those are reasons to take a bus. Now, in Ecuador, like I said, there's not a lot of options. You can hire a private driver, it can get expensive. Flights, like flying from Quito to Loja, every city doesn't have an airport. And even when they do, the flights are not reliable. You could get a flight and it's going to go out at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and then they cancel it, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. You could have taken a bus and been there long before. So that's why those are some reasons why bus travel is very popular in Ecuador, because you don't really have a lot of good option. It is changing for Cuenca, Quito to Cuenca, and Guayaquil to Cuenca, because there's I think now 2 airlines that are vying for services there. But it's still problematic. Now here in Colombia, it's more what you're used to. It's more like the United States. There's airports in Medellin and Bogota, but also in Manizales and Pereira. And here in Armenia, we've got an international airport, flights flying direct to Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Cali. There's airports all over the place, and in-country flights can be pretty cheap. Thank you very much. I appreciate the donation. Is that my cue to be quiet? I'm almost done. And then, whoa, this went on a lot longer than I thought, but I'll stay here and we'll get to the questions. Flights can be very cheap. I've seen flights like from Bogota to Pereira for as low as $28. That's pretty good. Bus might be half that, but either way, we're looking at small money. Not always the case, but flights are more realistic here in Colombia. Buses are really the realistic way in Ecuador. But I've gotten used to buses. I don't mind buses anymore. And it's funny because I would never ride a bus in the US. I think the last time I rode a bus was when I joined the Marine Corps, and they required everybody to get on a bus to go to Camp Lejeune, or no, Pears Island. Whew. Okay, that's it on crime. I have a couple things to cover. A question that was asked, and then I'll go right to the question. So if you got questions, start asking nice, and start asking now, but make sure that they're nice, and I'll get to them. The Skype calls, just to let you know, they're working well. I've been doing a couple a week. As a matter of fact, I've got a little trip to meet somebody in Manizales coming up. I know you're watching. It'll be for a couple days. And it'll be nice to get out and kind of walk around Manizales again. It's been a while, 9 months since I was there. So it'll be nice to see it again. It is a beautiful city. And for many people, you're going to find it better than a place like Armenia. I have my reasons for Armenia, but Manizales is an amazing place. Peso to the dollar has been a hot topic because the value has been so good. I got up to 34.50 last week. And when I arrived in Colombia, going on almost a year ago, it was around 2,800 and has been, it was around that for quite a while. And now it's gone up. You know, the 2,800 to 3,450, that's about $20 per 100. That's like free money. Every time you go to the ATM, you pull out $100 and you get $20 free. So the strong dollar has been very nice. But I caution you to be sure that if you're budgeting here, don't budget on what the peso is now. I budgeted on 2,500. It could go lower, could go higher, but for the most part, I was pretty confident that for the foreseeable future, that 2,500 would be around the low end. And it hasn't even gotten close. I think 2,800 is about as low as it's gotten. So enjoy it as a bonus, but don't budget based on 3,450. And as a matter of fact, I will tell you right now, they're talking about dropping interest rates again. And when they do, and they will, they'll drop interest rates again, whether it's 0.5% or 1%, or maybe it'll just be the 0.25%, let's hope. But when they do, that weakens the dollar, and that means that the peso will become stronger. So prepare for that. You know, we're on a free ride right now. Enjoy it while you can, but it's not the norm. You know, so think of it as just extra. Best Bank comes up a lot in Ecuador for fees. Bank Austro never charge me fees. In Colombia, the one to avoid is Bank of Colombia. They charge fees and you get hit on the exchange rate. Colpatria I found to be the best one because I get no fees and they give me the actual rate for today. So if it's 3,450, that's what they're giving me. So I'm getting a great rate. Do not go to exchange services or banks themselves. You're going to get screwed. So that is not the place to go. Have an ATM debit card, and you want to have it with Capital One or Schwab, because those are least likely to have any fees involved. So just a couple tips there. Last thing is, why don't I screen live on Facebook at the same time I'm doing it here on YouTube? Why don't I show intros or put information up on the screen? It's because the YouTube live doesn't allow me to do that. This is it. This is what they have. There's no bells or whistles to it. I have looked into it. I could do it, but I could do multi screenings at the same time. I could have, at a push of a button, have a stat come up or a picture or whatever I'm talking about. But the cheapest software is about $200 and up. And so, sorry, I'm just going to have to live with this. So that's it. Now I'm going to take a minute and kind of scroll back through here and look for any questions, and we'll get on to that part. Hold on. Oh my God, so much here. Well, there's a lot of conversation going on here. In Medellin, people wear their backpack on the front so they don't get pickpocketed. That's true. I could never do that because I don't know. I think I'd feel like an idiot, but that doesn't mean it's not a good point. It doesn't mean it's not valid. And you see a lot of local people will do that also. Well, not a lot of well, there's actually a lot of conversation that went on today and questions being answered by other people, which is great. And I see some very good answers there. There's one question here about what's your thought on carrying a dummy wallet? Fine, fine, do that. I don't know. Criminals don't really want to stick around. They want to grab and go. So you have a dummy wallet, they can take it and run. But if you don't have any wallet, many people here don't carry things like that. And so if you don't have it, then, you can just see them beat feet. They're not going to have you drop your pants and check. I mean, anything is possible, but these really aren't things that happen. So, all right. Well, last call for questions. Yeah, there's stash underwear. That's true. Inside pockets, sewing an extra inside pocket. You can actually go to one of the seamstresses here or in Ecuador. At El Centro, you see a bunch of them. There's dozens right around where I live. And you can go there with pants and ask them to sew an inside pocket, cost you $1 or so. And then you got a place to put money. And you're not going to pull it, you go to a restaurant, you can go in the bathroom and then you can pull it out to pay for the rest of it. I mean, it's certainly a way to do it. Carrying your cedula there can be okay. Although, if you remember recently, when I was in the bus terminal in Armenia and I took that picture and the cop came up and demanded to see my cedula, I would have had to drop my trousers right there in the terminal in order to get my cedula out. But, it's, something to consider. Or maybe you could even have access from your pocket to an inside pocket. I don't know. You get creative. It's not a bad way to go. I don't do that. I actually carry my wallet. I just don't keep much in my wallet. I keep bare minimum. Okay, we're not going to talk about how it makes you look endowed. All right. Well, I think that's it. Maybe I was so detailed, I answered all the questions. But the people that have contributed today, I thank you very much. I appreciate it. Keeps everything going. I hope the people watch this get something out of it. I hope it helps them. It's partly a frame of mind. It has more to do with the factors that I spelled out than it has to do with what country we're talking about. I can tell you that relatively, Colombia is reasonably safe, but it all depends on where. If I go to a bad section of Cali, if I go to certain areas of Medellin, if I'm careless, if I don't follow some of the things that I talked to you about, you become a target for crime. And I don't care. You can be in Toronto or you could be here in Armenia. So relax, plan things out. Don't let it derail your life. So that's all I got. I'll see you next Sunday.